My name is Jacob Anderson. This is Module 1, Personal Info and 3 Levels of Government Control in Public Education. So this first slide here is a little bit about myself. I have Mr. Anderson at the top because I'm a math teacher, and so I teach geometry and Algebra 1. On the left-hand side, I've got a picture of myself and my wife. On the top, I've got an Xbox One. If you find me playing video games, that's what it's going to be on. That's what I have, but mostly it's used for Netflix and stuff. I've got math on the top right because I was a math major. And on the top right, I've got a picture of me on a wake surfing board because I do a lot of water sports as well. During the summers, that's what I like to do. And then in the middle, I've got a picture of me wrestling. That's what I did in college for 5 years at Augustana University, which you can see at the bottom there. I've got the logo, Augustana University. And I coach wrestling here at Roosevelt High School where I teach. New things this year. I use a lot of Google Sites. Google Sites have been pretty awesome for me, especially with COVID, to set things up, put videos on there, and have my students keep caught up while they're at home. Alex is a website that I use in my math classes. It's for homework. You can have explanations on there and stuff. It's really awesome. It's unlike any other online program for math that I've ever used. And if you are a math teacher, I would encourage you to check it out for your school. It is paid. It's through McGraw-Hill, but it's awesome. Finally, I'm getting on Twitter a little bit. I know I'm about 15 years late to that, but I'm getting on Twitter, getting into the social media, trying to push things, for wrestling and stuff. And then designing signs. I've just threw that on there because I've been designing a sign for the wrestling room lately that turned out to be pretty awesome. So doing a little online designing it's been pretty fun. My demographics, I teach at Roosevelt High School. That is in Sioux Falls. Sioux Falls School District has 3 high schools and 5 middle schools, and I don't even know how many elementary schools, a lot more. But we're going to get another high school next year because we're over capacity here at Roosevelt. We've got the highest population in the state this year. And then, let's see, next year we'll have 4 high schools and we'll have 6 middle schools. So it's a pretty big district. And that's in South Dakota, obviously, which I'm going to be basing my presentation on. So local support from public schools. As you can see, as soon as I figure out how to move my camera here, I've got it in order from highest amount of power to least amount of power. And all of this information, you can see I've got Anderson and Hazlett there. That's the in-text citation for basically saying I had an interview with my head principal, Tim Hazlett. So a lot of the stuff kind of came from the conversations that we had. But the school board obviously has the most power here. Superintendent, then the principals. And then the rest of all of this it can kind of go however. I think PTA might have a little bit more power than maybe some of these other ones, but there's a lot of different advocacy groups. And then SFEA is like our teachers union. And then PTA, booster clubs, and then we have the Public Schools Education Foundation, which basically gives teachers grants and stuff for things that they need. So not a lot of power there, but they are very helpful. So I wanted to put them in there because that's part of our support. So, and obviously you can see which ones are paid and which ones are volunteer by the colors. The variety of advocacy groups that I have on there. Some are paid and some are volunteer. So I colored them both ways. Local support for public schools. This is a direct quote. And I could have chopped it up and made it my own, but there's no way that I could have. So I just took it directly from the text because they did such a good job of explaining it. Together, federal and state governments typically provide slightly more than half of government school funding, but school boards are responsible for funding the rest of their budgets. They do this by collecting property taxes on all of the homes and businesses within their district, or by allowing the city council to do so on their behalf. As a result, the amount of funding available to any given school district reflects a complex set of variables, including local tax rates, exemptions, and the overall affluence of the community. So, that does a pretty good job of talking about where that funding's coming from and that support. a lot of property taxes and whatnot. In terms of the state support, we've got the South Dakota Department of Education, we've got the South Dakota Activities Association, and we've got the Education Service Agencies. And all of these are paid positions, and their powers go, again, from top to bottom. So pretty basic on that one. State support. So states provide for slightly less than half of the school's operating costs. The funding comes largely from income and sales taxes. And then it says this part, I didn't actually know this before watching or reading these, but 42 states and the District of Columbia also derive a portion of their education funding from the state-run lotteries. Funds from state lotteries replace taxpayer money rather than supplementing it. So, I mean, if you have a lot of incoming money from lotteries, that's not going to mean teachers get paid more. That's just going to replace it, and then that taxpayer money would just go to something else like roads or whatever. Georgia and Tennessee use revenues from state-run lotteries to also fund scholarships for high-achieving graduates who stay in-state for college, but they are rare exceptions to the rule. All right, so federal support. I only came up with a couple things here. The Department of Education is obviously the big one, right? And then Betsy DeVos is the Secretary of Education, so she's got her name on a lot of things as well. All right, so from some of those readings, there's a lot stating that the federal support is it's the least involved of all the support systems in the schools. A lot of the support comes from the local and the state levels. The federal just kind of oversees it. The majority of education in a state and local responsibility in the United States. Is state and local responsibility. The majority is state and local responsibility. Yeah, that's just what I was saying. And then 92% of the funds come from non-federal sources. So 92% of school funding in the United States comes from something other than a federal program, which, yeah, that means they only provide 8%, which is not much. Some federal roles. Let's see if I can move myself. Here we go. So I've got a lot actually. It's crazy because it says that there wasn't much support, like in terms of the percentage, but I've got a lot of other things, a lot of slides about this federal support. First of all, getting information on what works in education to teachers and education policymakers. So they're overseeing these, state testing and all of this stuff. And then they take what works and they give it back to the teachers. They can see from all of the different states what's working and then give it back to teachers. So that's a pretty important role in the federal scheme. Some of their missions that were listed. The secretary and department play a leadership role in the ongoing national dialogue over how to improve the results of our education system for all students. And then access and excellence through all programs from preschool through postdoctoral education. So they're the whole span there is what they're kind of looking at. And then I've just got a bunch of these listed. I might not read through all of them, but I've got them listed and what they are. The protection of civil rights is maybe one of the biggest roles of the federal system. But we've obviously got Brown versus Board of Education. I think every article that I read had something about Brown versus Board of Education, or very close to almost every article. It seemed like it was everywhere. But then you've got a bunch of these other ones. All of those title with the Roman numerals, Title 1, Title 5, and Title 6 are all listed here. Title 6 and 7 are listed here. But yeah, you can read through those if you'd like. Some duties and responsibilities now. So now we're back to that local level. The duties and responsibilities of a school district would be to hire staff, set boundaries, enforce PD, schedule busing, set school schedules, and all of that stuff that you need to have a school run properly, schedules and whatnot. Also, create a school board. One of the articles said 96% of school boards are elected by a popular vote. So there were some that there were some school boards in the United States that aren't elected. Some have people that are placed there or something like that, but most of them are elected. Duties and responsibilities from the state. State governments exercise primary accountability and oversight for government-run schools. So the state obviously is accountable for all of the schools within the state. It's there to set and enforce the Common Core standards. 44 states enforce the Common Core. And then also, I mean, something that I personally think about when I think about the state government is that's how I renew my teaching license. That they keep track of all of that information. So that's just another one of their responsibilities. Federal responsibilities. The Department of Education was created in 1979 partly to coordinate and administer the growing responsibilities of all the incoming federal education legislation. So there was a bunch of new laws that came in, so they needed to create the Department of Education. There's 4 key principles that define the federal government's role in education. First, they ensure equal access to educational opportunity for all students. They provide compensatory funding to facilitate access to high-need students. They support education research and development to inform policy at state and local levels, and they support the development of state and local education systems. From the federal level, Congress has the ability to write statutes and distribute funds. They come as grants that can be released to all states on the same basis. And then I guess we've already talked about it, but I can throw it back in there again. It's just making sure that every single child is getting the opportunity to succeed in school as well. That would be just another one. So one of those that I'm talking about now would be, for example, the No Child Left Behind Act. The but okay, so I got to step back here for a second because they don't all work perfectly. The article was saying, so I just took an excerpt out that I thought was pretty important to read through. The federal government is poorly positioned to dictate the details of state and local efforts to improve their schools, write the authors. They also point out that strict accountability regulations based solely on test scores did little to improve student achievement and may have had the unintended consequence of inducing educators to focus on compliance over student success. So, for example, the No Child Left Behind Act, some people are for it, some people might not be, but this is just something that could go both ways. When you put in these acts at a federal level, they don't typically work for every single student. It might be good for the whole, but it might not work for everyone. So, just something to keep in mind. The 3 components and how I would rate them for like local, state, and federal. I think it goes in order like that: local, state, and federal. The local one, it's pretty obvious because it says school level governance, and it's developing these management systems for these schools. That's all done at the local level. There's nothing here that's a state level or a federal level. When you're creating the school, when it really comes down to it, and you're putting all these things into practice, that's at the local level. The state level would be the 6.2, where it says evaluate, develop, and advocate for data-informed and equitable resourcing plan that supports school improvement and student development. That's more of an overseeing of these schools. So that would be more of a state level. And then the federal one, I know it's federal because of the words implement laws. And that's what they do. They implement laws. If there's court cases, usually there's a law that comes afterwards. So that's a lot of the federal stuff going on there. How does all of this support the educational success and well-being of each student and adult? I took an excerpt out again because it did a better job than I could to explain it. It says, research strongly suggests that more educated adults live healthier, longer lives and are less likely to divorce, have children out of wedlock, and commit crimes. If that's not a good enough reason for supporting the well-being of each student, I don't know what is. Live healthier, have longer lives. Yeah, it's all good stuff. So, yeah. Standard correlation. Three components of the given standard describe the duties of the local, state, and federal roles of a school system. With these standards in mind, the well-being of students are ensured. Its relevance. The topics are relevant to me because as a school leader, it's important to know where the authority lies in certain situations. This way you can lean on others for support. And then in my reflection, this assignment will change the way that I teach and learn because I know where my support is coming from. For example, my future decisions will be decided by keeping in mind who would be affected by my choices and how people near me in my chain of command may react. Also, in terms of a funding decision, my future funding decisions could be decided knowing now where the money is actually coming from. Yeah. And this is my reference page. I'm excited to work with you guys. I'm excited to see what you guys had on this. This seems really interesting to me. So, yeah. Thank you for watching.